Hello, and welcome to Ways to Change Your Workplace with my guest today, Christina Ryan. I have lots to say about you, Christina, and bear with me. I've got a little bit I'd like to read out, if I may.
Sure, Prina, off you
Thank
go.
you. The wonderful Christina is based in Canberra. Christina established the Disability Leadership Institute in 2016 as a professional hub for leaders with disabilities to build and support our disability leaders. It's the first organization of its kind globally and aims to grow the presence and recognition of disability leaders across all sections of our community. Christina is also a regular keynote speaker and a commentator. Christina also has many, many accolades. Christina, I've been reading up about you.
Oh,
My list goes on. You have been a 2017 Westpac Social Change Fellow. That would have been such a cool opportunity. Christina has won Telstra Business Women's Awards. She's been awarded with a Lifetime Achievement in Inclusion at the ACT Chief Minister's Inclusion Awards as well as lots more. Christina, I'm going to put all of your details as well as your contact details in the show notes.
lovely.
What I want to talk to you, Christina, today about is the fact that she's disrupting organizational culture. Yes. 2, build disability leadership. So it's not just about sitting back and hoping that it happens. Today, Christina, I would like to chat to you about disrupting organizational culture to build disability leadership. Firstly, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Prina. It's really good to be in the flesh, as it were.
We've been talking for a while, so lovely to finally chat with you now. Christina, you are quite the powerhouse. You have been working really hard over the years in changing the landscape of organizational culture in relation to disability leadership. You've got a clear vision. What is disability leadership to firstly begin with, if we start at a foundational level?
Excellent question to start with, Prina. It's fascinating. When I first started thinking in terms of leadership work, I was working in violence, at the front end of violence, and campaigning for a Disability Royal Commission, doing a lot of that kind of work. And I had a team of advocates who were going into residential care and working with people dealing with violence. And I realised that we had an inequality problem, and realised that we needed to shift the inequality dial. We needed to have more disabled people doing leadership. And that was when I got my Westpac fellowship. And I spent a year, getting around talking to people, big companies, government agencies across 5 different states in the Commonwealth, and came to a really unpleasant discovery that there weren't really any people doing, there's not many disabled people in leadership positions. So it became quite clear that the inequality was even worse than we actually thought. Not only that, but nobody had even considered that disability and leadership might go in the same sentence. So disability leadership, there's 2 definitions I'm sharing with you today. One of them is just putting the 2 words together in the same sentence. It's disabled people doing leadership. Some of that might be positional leadership, so CEOs, senior government people, that sort of thing, politicians. But it's also that leadership around how you operate, that style of leadership, people who make change in their communities, people who influence others, who move the dial a bit.
Yeah.
So that takes us to the second definition of disability leadership that I've identified, which is the way we do leadership as disabled people, and recognising that up until pretty much now, our disabilities have been a bit inconvenient in the workplace. They're not really something that people want. It's very rare to find an employer going out there saying, I want to find a disabled person, they've got what I need. It's usually the other way around. It's usually something that employers feel they are obliged to do as a way of being nice and kind of charitable towards disabled people. Well, let's push that to one side.
Or a tick in the
Yeah,
box often.
tick in the box, absolutely tick in the box stuff. And in fact, it's fascinating if you get out there and read a lot of the diversity content, and there's a truckload of it out there. You know, the internet's full of it. All of the top journals are full of it. They all talk about diversity. Very, very rarely do they actually use the word disability in their diversity writing. Very, very rarely is the article even focused on disability. So it's just sort of absent from thinking. What we're discovering, now that I've spent several years running the Disability Leadership Institute and training people, developing people, we have several programs, is we're discovering that there are ways that disability leaders do things. And that's really exciting. When people are not trying to hide their disability in the workplace, they're not, you know, putting it to one side, they're not masking it, they're not pretending they're not disabled. When they're able to be themselves, we see a number of things start to happen. One of them, according to some research that was published in Harvard Business Review, is that disabled people are 10% more innovative in the workplace than other people. Why would you want, you know, you want that? Let's get that happening. But there's other things that we're starting to see is people finding that using their disability means that they're actually able to operate in a way that is more empathetic. It has a sense of self-awareness that makes team leading a much easier task, understanding where people are coming from. These aren't qualities that are generic to disabled people generally, but they seem to be highly prevalent in those of us who are maintaining a workforce presence. So, you know, those of us who are staying the game. So, you know, one of the things that people have to do is become very self-aware, because they need to be able to maintain their operability, their health and well-being. You know, so that they're not pushing themselves to the point where they're collapsing, you know, and going back out, doing it and going in and out. So it's actually quite fascinating, some of these things we've discovered. That greater self-awareness around ourselves means that it, you know, becoming a team leader, for example, you've got somebody who automatically understands that their team member requires something of a response that isn't just, I'll get back to work and stop whinging. You know, that stuff, that you might work differently, that there might be other ways of approaching a problem. This gets us back to the innovation, but also different ways of working. You know, flexibility. We all talk about flexibility. Everybody's excited about flexibility in the workplace. Very few workplaces seem to be doing it well. You know, some of them talk about it. Some of them have things like flexible hours or working from home capacity. We've all been working from home a lot more recently, of course. But the ability to mix the job up, to actually approach it differently. And that's something that the pandemic's given us, which we didn't expect, but we're really welcoming with open arms, is the ability to do things like, if I work better at 3 o'clock in the morning, well, why not? Why not? Why should I be working those hours that everybody else is working instead of working when it suits me and when my body is best operating? You know, so some of these things that give us a different perspective on how to work. And, you know, that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's all sorts of ways you need to manage it so it isn't a disaster. You need to make it work. But flexibility, the ability to look at things differently, the ability to understand that everyone is different and needs to be catered to differently. On top of that, greater self-awareness, that ability to understand that things don't have to always be done the same way. We're starting to understand some things about disability leadership, which are pretty exciting.
It's fascinating, and while you were talking, I've been taking notes. So you talked about self-awareness. So if an individual does have a disability, they are very self-aware, you know, about their disability and whatever else that comes with it as well from a societal perspective. So then we can add that to the workplace. And then thanks to their self-awareness, they are therefore authentic. And, you know, we talk about authentic leadership. Hello.
That's
right.
it.
Okay.
It's not generic. So this isn't, you know, because not all disabled people have these qualities. It seems to be about that interface point where you are going out into the world and trying to operate every day.
Yes.
on a regular basis. So maintaining your ability to interact with the wider world. And of course, many disabled people, about half of us in Australia, don't work at all. People are not employed. And so that chance to become self-aware, to learn how to do it, isn't there. So this is where some of our training starts to come in, where we start to work with people around building that stuff, getting
Right.
better at acknowledging that you are not superhuman.
No.
You know, despite all of the inspiration porn, as we call it, despite all the rubbish out there that suggests that, you know, we are superhuman just for getting out of bed. No, we're not. You know, it is actually about that recognition that, you know, here's how to manage yourself, here's how to operate. And of course, it's something that you mentioned the word authentic. There's also something in that self-awareness for leaders generally about knowing when you need to stop.
Yes.
You know, no, you can't just keep pounding yourself at the same rock over and over again, recognizing that all of us need to pull back periodically. We all need to be honest with ourselves. It's not just about authenticity, you know, that's a thing. It is actually also about the ability for us to manage what can sometimes be quite intense workloads.
Absolutely. And Christina, does the Disability Leadership Institute help with developing leaders in the leadership aspect as well?
Absolutely we do. Oh, yes. In fact, it was quite interesting. Our major leadership program, the big 12-month one, the Future Shapers, is a mainstream leadership program. And it's the same kind of vertical leadership development, which is a thing, look it up, vertical leadership development that the Federal Police use.
Okay.
It's very mainstream, it's the thing. And what we've done is actually interweave that disability element throughout it. That's the unique nature of the program. Of course, we knew that the vertical leadership, which is quite, it's not a fully academic thing, it's quite an experiential program. So, you know, there's no hiding yourself in the middle of that. You really do have to engage with it. What that engagement seemed to do was readjust the way people related to their disability and how they related to their disability in the workplace.
Wow.
We knew there'd be a bit of it, but really didn't expect it to be quite to the extent that it seems to have happened. And now that we're on our third iteration of the program, you know, we're a little bit better at it now, and understand a lot more the sorts of, well, it puts people through quite a bit. You know, it's not, I mean, we're mindful of that. We're not irresponsible about it. But, you know, the first year, most of the participants got sick. So, you know, everybody, you know, their bodies kind of went a bit out of whack. But we're different at it now. Now we're much better at really almost holding the mirror up to people. And, you know, you can't put your disability over there. It's right here. It's who you are. And it has enormous benefits. The thing that I haven't mentioned, of course, is the incredible resilience that many disabled people have. Incredible reserves of resilience, which, you know, all of those mainstream leadership programs, you know, resilience is the gold star thing that everybody wants to build. And, you know, there's all these retired military blokes who do podcasts and things that talk about building resilience and leadership. And the truth is, for most disabled people who, again, are operating on a regular basis and out there doing something, resilience becomes a fact of life. You know, that continuing to operate when you're not really quite up for it some days, when it can be very difficult, but also this difficult environment that happens where the world isn't quite built for us yet. So we're not just dealing with a hostile physical environment, but we may also be dealing with an environment where we're not particularly wanted or where we're treated with suspicion. You know, that most workplaces, there's still very high rates of bullying for people with disability. And so, you know, withstanding those sorts of onslaughts, but also withstanding things like, you know, people just don't want you there, or they feel threatened by the fact that you might be the new team leader and you're a bit threatening because you shouldn't be more intelligent than everybody else, that sort of thing. So we can end up with environments that are quite psychologically damaging as well. And so resilience becomes a really big part of the way people operate, often without realising they're doing it, which is fascinating.
Very fascinating, and you made so many good points there. One of the questions I want to ask you is, do you also support organizations, corporations in understanding disability leadership and breaking these stereotypes or taboos or barriers that you just discussed?
Yes and no.
Yes, I know. Okay.
Yes. So we're not a lobby group. We don't
Yep.
do lobbying. You know, I've spent most of my life doing lobbying work, and I'm taking a break. So I'm now working on development, training, and development. But it's one of those classic situations which we've talked about in our entrepreneur space. We have a lot of entrepreneurs, so we have an entrepreneur space, and one of the things that we've recognised is that a lot of this work is change-making work.
Yeah.
And so we often have to create an understanding of a field before we can actually work in the field.
Right.
And so to that extent, the Disability Leadership Institute does a lot of awareness raising amongst corporate and government. But we also do consulting work behind the scenes, yes. So we do in-house training. Most of our participants, our members and the participants in our programs come from those companies and those government agencies that we work with. So, you know, they're the people wanting us to work with their people. You know, a lot of coaching. I do a lot of leadership coaching. And a lot of it is about, you know, how to be the only one in your workplace.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh,
how is it when you're the only one? You know, and it doesn't matter. You could get up and go to another workplace, but you're still going to be the only one. Because we're still in that situation where there are so few people above a certain level. So it's quite an interesting environment and an interesting challenge. So while we don't do lobbying formally, we do an awful lot of talking with people who need to hear certain things.
yeah, right messages at the right time. And I know you are quite the advocate for all of your alumni or current students as well. If you haven't followed Christina on LinkedIn, you really must. You'll learn a lot from her.
Thank you.
Christina,
Yes.
another question for you. Pandemic happening globally. How has that changed the landscape of disability leadership? Are you seeing anything different happening now? Because most of us are now working from home, therefore offices don't have that, how am I going to recruit someone with a disability kind of quandary?
Indeed, well put. Definite quandary. It's changing the landscape and it's doing it rapidly. I am not hearing anything from the disability community about snapping back to the way things were done before. Nobody wants to do that because
Yep.
suddenly we've got people we can work from anywhere.
Yes.
So, you know, that if that means in our whatever location we're in the comfort of our home. Now, not everybody wants to work from home. You know, we have a number of people who are members of the Disability Leadership Institute who prefer to be in an office because they need the routine, the regulation, that level of being around other people. But
Yeah.
for a lot of disabled people, working from the environment that suits them best means they can finally do jobs that were never available to them before. That's just one thing. What we've also seen is suddenly we're able to speak at conferences. We're able to participate in consultations. We can do it from anywhere on the planet.
Yes.
And so it's, you know, and people operate at all sorts of different times of the day and night. So there's a lot of things happening that are fully virtual for the very first time. And that suits so many of us. You know, all you need is a device and a decent internet connection. Not all of us have that, of course. Poverty is
No.
an issue for many people. But, you know, that device and that internet connection can take you to conferences that you never would have attended before. They can take you to being speakers, to being consulted, to being experts in locations where you would never have worked before. And so that is a huge difference. It raises the profile of disabled people. It raises the ability of disability leaders to work where we should be working, where previously we've been excluded.
Yeah.
And it also provides a really good illustration of what flexible work can look like. And so it's mixing it up for everybody. And while there are some people who've been really struggling with the pandemic, with working from home, they've lost control of their team's not under their nose all the time, you know, this sort of thing. For many of us, it's opened up the world to being far more accessible without even leaving our house. And that's just fantastic. You know, other things are more challenging, but there is a complete shift in the way work has happened. And I think we're going to see This is a pivot point in the 21st century and a shift of the dial towards a far more inclusive workplace. At least I hope so.
Me too. I have one final question for you, Christina. This is called Ways to Change Your Workplace. What is one way you, Christina Ryan, would change your workplace?
Well, I really think people need to get their goat on, go for it. We need to start valuing disability as the asset that it is.
Yes.
We need to start seeing it as an asset in workplaces, because it is, and it should be, rather than as something that you have to do, that box you have to tick. Once we start to get real diversity happening in our teams, once we start understanding what flexible looks like, the richness of it, the innovation, the problem solving, and just the sheer spreading of our networks and understanding of different people in different circumstances, it makes a huge difference to how we will work. So that's my current thing. I really want people to start thinking about disability as the asset that it is, rather than as a hindrance, rather than as a barrier to employment.
Beautiful. You are truly disrupting the way of working. Thank you so much, Christina.
Thanks so much for having me, Prina.
It's a pleasure.